Blog Talk Radio.
Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach, always available.
And Carol the Coach, always available to talk to you about any issues imaginable. And I must confess, my specialty is sex addiction and partner betrayal. And I just spent 2 nights at the recording studio recording, believe it or not, my very first book, Help Her Heal. And it was so much fun, but so much has changed since I did that. One of the things that I know is when we know better, we do better. And one of the things that I say in my Help Her Heal course and in my Help Her Heal instruction for professionals is do not let addicts, men or women with compulsive problematic sexual behavior, look at their spouse and say, I understand. Because there is no way, it's not conceivably possible that you could ever understand what your partner is going through. And so as I'm reading it, what do I see? Oh my gosh, I see the word understand like 3 or 4 times. So what I know is I got to talk to my publisher and say, hey, let's redo this. Let's redo the book and make sure it's not out there to say I understand. Because I never, and I mean never, want you to make that statement. There were other things I saw, too, that just were not, they weren't what I would say today. And, again, we are getting smarter in this field. When I started this field, we called partners codependent. And I knew that was wrong from the get-go. When we started this field, we told professionals to be porn neutral, to not impose values against pornography in our sessions, unless somebody had a problem with pornography and then address the issue. Well, there is no way I would endorse pornography on any level. I just wouldn't. And the reason I wouldn't is because it's objectification of men and women. And some, not all, but some of the actors and actresses are being exploited. They're being trafficked. And if they're not, they are exploiting. They're exploiting themselves. They're exploiting their customers. They're exploiting their viewers. This thing is ugly with pornography. And although it's not always the gateway, in many, 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 many cases, it is the gateway for additional acting out in other ways. And so I could no more endorse that than a man in the moon. And so, again, when you know better, you do better. And that's what I love about being a pioneer in the field. I was talking with a woman the other day. She said she was on a plane. I'm not outing her. There are a lot of you that have been on planes. But she said, I was reading Help Them Heal, which, of course, is my book for couples, about IRCA, the Early Recovery Couples Empathy Model. And she said, I read 3 chapters. I was just so mad. I was so mad. And she said, because I'm reading this stuff, and this has not happened in my history. It hasn't. You know, I'm not getting immediate disclosures. And then I talk to other women that say, you know, they came home and dropped the bomb on me. There was no safety, no structure. And we are a new and growing field. And she said, Carol, I was mad as I was reading your book. I wasn't really mad at you because you're saying what I know to be true, but I was mad that I hadn't gotten any of this. And her husband chimed in and said, I'm mad at the system too. This wasn't partner sensitive. My first therapist told me not to share recovery goals, not to share my 3 circles. And you all know from listening to the show, I am a believer in sharing your recovery with the person that needs to feel safe. So, okay, that's my bandwagon. Now, I will tell you a personal struggle I'm having. And I know it's a professional problem that I need to really work on. I need to change my attitude. So I'm telling you this so you all, my listeners, can hold me accountable. But I'm writing a new book on infidelity, not sex addiction, but infidelity, which is problematic compulsive behavior in most cases, but it doesn't fit the definition of compulsivity like sex addiction does. And I'm trying to write it with gender-neutral terms. And I am having the hardest time because when I write to you. And I'm in Midwest Indiana, and I don't have that many gay clients, and I don't have that many transgendered clients. And so I'm really writing to male sex addicts and female partners, although I'm seeing more and more female sexual addiction. But I am really trying to write this book and be respectful of everybody, and I'm having trouble because I feel like it depersonalizes things for me. I know it's going to be better for the community, but it's hard for me. And I don't feel like I'm talking directly to you. So I hope you don't have to buy this book. You already have enough books to read. But as I go out in the world and I write something bigger, because infidelity happens more than sex addiction, I hope that the people that read it will know that I'm talking to them. Because, you know, we are in a business that's very, very, very personal. That's why I have my guest on today. You know, he's an expert at ADHD and at sex addiction, and I wanted him to talk about his own experience as well as being a professional and how attention deficit hyperactivity disorder looks like sex addiction and may contribute towards sex addiction. And actually, sex addiction may contribute to the disorder. And yet, he and I will have this discussion because I've not talked to him about it yet. Sometimes I think our clients who have sex addiction get misdiagnosed with ADHD because the brain works very similarly when in active addiction. So I just can't wait to talk with Jonah Anderson. And I'll tell you what, when he, to our listserv, he was so passionate about the subject, I said, you have got to come on, talk to my listening audience. I know a lot of my listeners have been diagnosed with ADHD. So, Jonah, welcome to Sex Help with Carol the Coach.
Thank you, Carol. It is a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
I am looking forward to this, and because I do have ADHD, I am actually really nervous that I'm going to screw up or forget something. So I took notes to write out what I wanted to say today.
Oh, and I love that because that's what we have to do when we're compensating for second and third disorders, diagnoses, or just problems. I have a tendency to interrupt people, so I'll wave my hand to you, and you'll know I got a question. Share a little bit, as we both did, about your journey and about your work in sex addiction.
Okay, well, I've been doing sex addiction work since 2018, and the more I've learned about ADHD, I live with it, the more I'm realizing that I'm seeing this in my clients. And the reason why this is important is that if it's ADHD and not addiction, if we manage the ADHD, the maladaptive behaviors go away. I was much the same way because I thought I might have been a sex addict for years, but like, for example, I've viewed pornography and then just one day I just lost interest in it and then stopped. And it's just like, I don't have the desires to do it anymore because as I've grown older, I've matured, and that is really, really important in this discussion because people with ADHD have about a 30% deficiency in executive functioning. That also leads to a significantly delayed maturity response. So, for example, someone at age 18 has a mental age of about 12.6 years. A person who is 21 has a mental age of 14.7. And the person at 30 years has a mental age of 21. The reason why that is important is when you pair it with an inability to inhibit impulse control and a 30% deficiency of executive functioning, which is judgment, risk-taking, consequence, you can see very clearly that is it addiction or is it that you just have a person with a delayed immaturity who doesn't understand the consequences and doesn't know how to inhibit the impulses.
And you and I both know from our certified sex addiction therapy backgrounds that sex addiction usually gets worse. And for you to have been able to grow out of it, so to speak, and not find that same compulsivity, that screams that you didn't have sex addiction, doesn't it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what drove me to start thinking about this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And so you also believe what I said, which is that it's very, it gets misdiagnosed the other way too, that some addictions look like attention deficit disorder with or without hyperactivity, when in essence, when you stop the compulsivity, the focus can come back.
Yeah, that's another thing with executive functioning. One of the things that I did research was there is a correlation and a well-documented connection between ADHD and what's called hypersexual behavior. ADA primes you to want the most exciting stimulus possible, and nothing is more exciting than sexualized content. We use it to cope with negative emotional states. This relates to a condition that if you have ADHD, called Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, which is an intensely negative reaction to real or perceived criticism, negativity, embarrassment, disappointment, and life is just really frustrating for people with ADHD, and we turn to addictive behaviors. I also have problems with spending money, which is a very common thing that people with ADHD do struggle with. Also, difficulties in controlling impulses, and not thinking about the consequences of their actions. And I am living proof of this because the things I did in my past are still coming back to haunt me, to this day, because I can't undo what I've done. And to speak to your point, Carol, increases in impulsivity correlates with the worsening of ADHD and hypersexuality. As impulsivity increases or decreases, so does the behavior. And so I think you're right, is that the more chaos we have in general, I believe that can definitely drive. So I actually, do believe that you are correct, is that if someone's living a very chaotic and out of control life, it would look a lot like ADHD.
Yeah, and so I was excited that you shared on the listserv some of your thoughts and beliefs to help professionals look at things differently. You did a really nice job about that. So, first of all, obviously when I went to school, there was ADD, attention deficit disorder, and then there was ADHD, and that was attention deficit disorder with hyperactivity. Now they've merged them, haven't they?
Yes, they have. That was confusing. I was diagnosed with ADD originally, and then it wasn't until years later I'm like, oh, there's an H now. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. But really, ADHD is a misnomer because it's not an issue with attention. We notice everything. People with ADHD have problems with selective focus mm-hmm. and discriminating where we should prioritize what. And people also think of ADHD as only the hyperactive child that can't sit still, mm-hmm. doesn't pay attention. ADHD is a neurodivergent condition that impacts the frontal lobe of our brain, which is where the prefrontal cortex and everything, that all of the apparatus that deal with executive functioning. And with ADHD, there's about a 30% decrease in the effectiveness of those structures.
Now, I want to ask you a question because, again, you look way younger than me. I'm 68, and may I ask your age?
I am 48 years old.
Okay. He looks younger, listening audience. He looks younger than that. But anyway, so there's 20 years difference. And when I worked in a children's clinic, and we worked with ADD and ADHD, they called ADD minimal brain dysfunction. Mm-hmm. And they said that for both classifications, stimulants were given because actually the brain worked too fast, and when you gave stimulants, it slowed down their brain functioning so that they were able to focus. And what I heard you just saying is really this condition, you notice everything. So you might not be able to focus, but you notice everything. Is that correct?
Yeah, we notice everything. Mm-hmm. And we don't know what we should focus on because because here's what I really want people to understand about ADHD. Whenever I feel like I'm working with clients who I think might have undiagnosed ADHD, I'll ask them a few specific questions. And once, they answer, I'm like, okay, I think they have it, but the big takeaway here is the lack of impulse control, the lack of processing time. Mm-hmm. With ADHD, ADD, there is no delay. You get an emotion or impulse, it hits me automatically. Mm-hmm. And without medication, without self-care, it just comes out. And then, like the character Hagrid from Harry Potter, when he says, I should not have said that. Mm-hmm. Or I should not have done that. And so the inability to slow down and to just go, 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 that coupled with, like I said, the inability to inhibit impulses. That's what this is all about, and it leads to so many decisions and so many unfortunate things in life.
And so you use this word that more and more and more people are using, and it seems like a really healthy description generically, and that's neurodiversity. Will you explain to our listening audience who may not have heard of that word yet what neurodiversity is?
To the best of my understanding, neurodiversity is a term that indicates a person with a condition like ADHD, my brain functions a little differently. I think of things differently. I don't have the same processes. And that's all it's really saying is that I have a different way of thinking and processing. And that therein lies one of the biggest challenges for people who not only live with ADHD, but live with any neurodivergence, neurodiversity, because the biggest thing that I have noticed is that it can be very traumatic because we are expected to fit into a world we do not understand, that no one has ever explained to us, and do not understand that this is something that we are really struggling with. It's not that we're not trying. We oftentimes, if you have any neurodiverse condition, have to try about 2 or 3 times harder just to be where I am and how people see me. And this is another reason why ADHD is so important. So much of sex addiction is driven by shame. And ADHD, we are gaslits our entire lives because we're told we need to try harder. We're not listening. We just need to apply ourselves. Why can't we get this? You know, why can't you be more like your brother, sister? And I'm sure, Carol, living with neurodiversity, probably could have your own list of phrases and questions you've heard that's like this. And these statements have a lot of blame, and they're laced with criticism and contempt, which are 2 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So most people with ADHD have, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, have terrible trauma from people getting things like this and being made to feel like there is something wrong with us and why can't I be like everyone else? And so that turns to addiction. But the other reason why this is important is that in recovery for sex addiction, if you don't actually have sex addiction, you have ADHD, that proceeding with treatment normally can really, it would be helpful to understand because a lot of people with their RSD, with ADHD, are going to have a lot of struggles. This is where my ADHD is coming in because I think I'm getting confused and all of the words are getting jumbled. So if you have any questions or feedback, please jump in.
Well, I don't think you're getting confused at all. You know, I believe that you get very passionate about this and it becomes more emotional. For our listening audience, he's talking about neurodiversity and that the brain perceives things differently. And I love the fact that you brought up that when you have ADHD, you get gaslit a lot because people expect you to do things that you're not capable of doing. You've never been taught. I would think that even being taught requires a really long process of practice and doing it again and practice. And the most important thing that a parent or a therapist, a counselor, a pastor can do is have patience and really praise you on your changes when you're able to make them because of practice. And, you know, you brought up this term that I'm sure most of our listening audience has never heard of, rejection sensitive dysphoria. And then he even said RSD. And that really means that you've lived a life where you've felt rejection because you couldn't process in the same way as somebody without this condition, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Mm-hmm.
And it also leads to the other reason why it's so damaging is for people with ADHD and the lack of impulse control, we have a tendency to ruminate on things like this. And it's sort of like we get triggered and we go down a rabbit hole, and then we end up beating ourselves up and just reliving, some very painful experiences, and on top of it, blaming ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I could just be a better person, I wouldn't have made that mistake.
But, it parallels being a partner, because that's what a partner does. Wonders what's wrong with him or her, and wonders how she could have missed things, and then ruminates, and it becomes a vicious cycle. So I can really appreciate the rumination factor of ADHD. Now, I just want to make it clear, because you may be listening to this show wondering if you have ADHD in addition to sex addiction, or you may be listening to the show and you may be wondering, oh, could my sex addiction really be ADHD? And so as a CSAT, a certified sexual addictions therapist, what would you tell somebody to do to tease out both of those clinical, if you will, disorders? Because it does get very, very confusing.
Well, what I pay attention to is I'm looking for keywords and phrases that people will often say, and it's very specific to people with ADHD. If someone says, I've never been able to apply myself, for me, that is a dead giveaway that a person probably has been living with undiagnosed ADHD. And then I'll talk about academic performance. That is probably, not always, but for the people with undiagnosed, that's usually the best indicator of ADHD. It's not that you're failing, it's just that you can't ever apply yourself and get good grades. And parents will say, no matter what I do, he or she just doesn't apply himself. And so I listen to things as I'm going through. I'm not just treating sex addiction. I like to look at and to see if I can find the actual cause of behavior. Because I believe if you treat what's driving the behavior, that's going to be much more effective.
And so then we know that there are medications, both stimulants and non-stimulants, that can treat ADHD. And there are medications that can also help with urges and cravings and compulsivity for sex addiction. What's your feeling about medication, and what are some of the holistic things one can do to cope better with life and to do better?
Excellent question, Carol. Medication can be an important part of your treatment, but what I tell all of my clients is it's not the only way to get there. In my opinion, it's by far the most effective. But for people who do not wish to take medication, there's a lot of things you can do holistically. I like to recommend omega-3 fish oil. That helps with concentration. And there's something called valerian root, Valerian. People use it for sleeping. And what it does is it depresses your processing speed and gives you more time to process before reacting. So that can be very helpful. Organization and time management. Break bigger projects down into smaller projects. You have a chore to clean the entire kitchen. I walk in, I look at everything, I get overwhelmed. If I look at this like, okay, I'm going to focus on doing one task at a time, and I'm going to start with the dishes. And I'm just going to focus on getting the dishes done. And so on. So forcing myself to slow down, forcing myself to focus on one thing at a time, taking, breaks where I'm not working, like every 25 to 30 minutes, take a few minutes breaks to give my brain a chance to reset and not have to focus as much. And this is something I just discovered when I started to force myself to slow down, is that when I only have one thing in my brain, I can give all of my energy and focus to that thing. The moment a second thing pops up, then I'm thinking about that activity and I'm pulling attention, focus, and concentration from that activity, and it's getting split into two. And on top of it, it starts to make my brain spin faster. So I start to want to get through what I'm doing quicker so I can get on to the next thing. That's where I make mistakes. Yesterday, I made several doozies of mistakes that were all caused by because I was thinking of multiple things, and without realizing it, I said or did something without thinking. So spending time in nature and just getting some physical activity can be some other excellent ways to cope with this.
Yeah, I heard you say self-care, and it makes sense that being out in nature and being physical, whether it's walking, running, kickboxing, whatever, is going to help. Now, I want to ask, again, RSD, this very new concept to me, I want to make sure that I am sensitive to that in my work with clients, and I'm sure our listening audience wants to make sure they're sensitive in raising their children and dealing with their husbands or wives that may have ADHD and or sex addiction. Can you tell me how can we be aware of that when we're working with people that have impulse control problems, just in general, this RSD?
What I do know, what triggers my RSD is in conversations is when someone leads with a what or a why question. Those make me defensive. And so if you see people getting really, really defensive when they're asked a question like, why did you do that? Mm-hmm. For the person with ADHD, that sets off a chain reaction of shame, blame. And so I like to talk about language with accountability, and this is probably more important for people who live with someone with ADHD. Rather than saying, why did you do that, say, can you help me understand what your thought process was there? Because that takes the accusatory tone out of the statements, and it makes it much more inviting for the person to answer, and they don't get flooded with emotions, and their level of tolerance doesn't go way down when they're doing that. As far as recognizing RSD, is the reaction, like how intense is the reaction to the stimulus? If that makes any sense, Carol.
Okay. You gave us very, very good advice to really watch our languaging so that we're not asking the whys and the whats, but just ask with curiosity. And, that's a coach. I'm a coach and a therapist, and coaching is all about being curious and asking for understanding. I love that. And then what I also heard you say is that it's important to not have the mind state of judgmentalness. And unfortunately, in the field of sex addiction, when it's a husband and wife or two partners, there is that judgmentalness that can come from either direction. I mean, I just had a woman who was holding some boundaries about sexuality, and it felt very judging to her husband. So we have to be very aware not to judge, to understand, to be curious, to use language. And back to my original question about, I was taught that only physicians could diagnose ADHD. And yet, in your practice, this is a niche, and this niche helps you to identify people who may or may not have this problem. What would you tell a sex addict who's wondering right now, gosh, do I have ADHD? Where should that person go?
The first thing that I would do is, one, if you think you have it, do not talk to your general practitioner.
Okay.
General practitioners, some of them are educated, most of them aren't, and you will likely get medically gaslit by them saying they don't think you have it. But that would be step one. But I would go to and start to do some research. There are some websites out there that are user-friendly, that are loaded with information. One is Attitude Magazine. I think that's www.attitudemag.com. And the other is CHADD, CHADD.org. And I would start to research ADHD. And I would start to ask myself some questions. Does this feel like me?
Yeah, those are great resources, and I know that CHADD was around even when I was first learning. So for 40 years, it's been around, and I agree with you. Anything that's research-based is going to be less judgmental, less critical, and more about the facts. So, Jonah, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how might they do that? I'm sure you've inspired a lot of people to look at things differently, and there may be some people that would like to ask you questions.
I can be reached through my email address. It is my first name, Jonah, Anderson, Anderson, no dot, at Serene, SERENE, Waters, counseling.com. I can also be reached at, I have a telephone number, 262-302-0016.
Absolutely. So again, his website is www.serenewaterscounseling.com. Pull up the website, hit the contact.
Oh, I'm sorry. Carol, the website, it's actually down. It's just, that's my email address, Jonah Anderson at serenewaterscounseling.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the website, is there information about ADHD or sex addiction on the website?
There used to be, but because I transitioned over to private practice,
okay,
I made the decision to take the website, I transitioned from private practice to working for an established healthcare, because I discovered that being a business owner is not a strength for someone with ADHD. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'm just tired of trying to focusing, so I went to work for an actual company, and I took the website down as a result.
Got it. Well, I'll tell you what, you're a man who knows what your limits are and how to do self-care. So thank you so much, Jonah, for sharing your wisdom with us, for taking good care of yourself. And again, you can get a hold of him at JONAHANDERSON, Anderson, at SereneWatersCounseling.com. Thank you, Jonah, so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for inviting me. And it has been a pleasure, and I hope you have a great day. You take care.
You too. Bye-bye. So as you can see, very passionate and very knowledgeable about neurodiversity in general. So gave us some food to think about, didn't it? Hey, thank you so much for tuning into the show, being so open to the many topics that we talk about. Stay curious. Ask yourself, what can I do to be kind? And as I say at the end of every show, there'll only be one of you at all times. Fearlessly have the courage to be yourself. Make it a good week, and I'll see you soon for more sex help with Carol, the coach.